But the one behind us was coming closer and closer, and there's no way, we were sailing, there's no way we were going to be able to get out of his way. So Jamie had to get on the VHF and talk to him, got him on the radio, and yes, sir, I see you, yes, I see you on AIS, blah, blah, blah. Jamie requested for him to go behind. And he said he was going to go past the fishing vessel and then round us. And it made no sense. For 10 minutes, I should think, there was a conversation back and forth, and it became very clear that this man was looking at our AIS signal, and he was looking at a different boat in front of him, and he was using the boat in front of him to make his decisions. I think that my heart was in my mouth at that stage. I was sure he was going to hit us. Hello, I'm Liz.
And I'm Jamie.
Welcome to Follow the Boat, in which we discuss what it's really like to give it all up to live on a boat.
And go travelling around the world. We've been doing it since 2006 and we're still at it.
Each week we talk about our latest YouTube video.
And about boats, sailing, travel or anything else which floats into our heads.
And if you leave a comment we like, we'll give you an answer and a name check. Peace and fair winds.
We are entering the second night of a 2-night, 3-day passage. So second night at sea. We thought it was an appropriate time to discuss a few tactics and maybe some tips and tricks about night sailing, specifically about night sailing.
I tried very hard to record at night, but as you can see I failed, but here it is, it's the morning. I had real problems because we had a lot of traffic going on when I was on watch. That's my excuse, but the real reason is I did record 8 minutes of just verbal diarrhea. But I didn't record the sound. So here we are. I'm going to try and talk a little bit about night sailing right now.
I would say the most important thing that you need to understand how to use is this. Now, for those who are listening who can't see what I'm holding up, this is a hand-bearing compass. I would say when you're night sailing, understanding how to take bearings and using a hand-bearing compass or other tools at your fingertips, is perhaps possibly the most important thing, because this is the one thing that you need to be looking out for whenever you are night sailing are, of course, other vessels, maybe some marker lights, navigation lights and so on. Because the lights are the only things that you have got to tell you where things are in relation to your boat. Now, of course, an understanding of actual night lights helps, so what the different lights mean, I'll talk about that in a moment. But I tend to find that the thing that I'm doing the most on a night passage is taking bearings, especially if you're in a busy area like we are at the moment, where you have a lot of traffic. So you need to keep an eye on all the ships that are passing by. Now, of course, you're using their navigation lights to your advantage, your port, starboard and stern lights. But of course, not all vessels are lit up correctly, especially in this part of the world.
The other day, it was my watch, or the other night rather, it was my watch, saw a green light, and those of you who know that a green light is starboard, right-hand side if you like. So I could see this starboard light coming towards the boat and thinking, right, that's how he's going to go down that side, that's all good, blah, blah, blah. But he seemed to be coming straight at us, and I couldn't see anything through the binoculars. The moon had gone down, it was a bit dark, couldn't work out what he was doing. There were lots of other lights a long way away in the distance, white lights. So eventually I called Jamie out and said, look, I can't work this one out. He went past us, down the starboard side, so he went starboard to starboard, not port to port, but he had an all-round green light, which means absolutely nothing. If you're familiar with the coal regs, you know that that means nothing. And actually it's quite potentially dangerous because it's giving off to anyone who's looking the wrong information about what they're seeing.
We thought we were passing his starboard side, but nope. But of course we were taking bearings using the hand-bearing compass.
For me, night sailing, it's a funny old thing. It depends on where you're sailing, firstly, as to how I feel about it. My first night sailing was across quite deep, big, empty seas, and I loved it. There's nothing quite like being out on the ocean at night, because if there are any odd things that are going on, you've got a million places you can run to. So if you've got bad weather conditions suddenly come in and hit you, you can heave to, you can run one way or another, it doesn't matter. You haven't got to worry about any hazards, basically. You're away from the fishing fleets. You're that far out, there aren't any fishing vessels around. There might be the odd one, there might be the odd commercial vessel, but you can go for days without seeing anybody or anything, and it's quite joyful at night. If you've got a full moon at night in the ocean, I think that is the pinnacle. Good winds, full moon, middle of the ocean. It's a time to just let your thoughts run wild.
The second thing, as I just mentioned, of course, is to understand what all the different lights mean. Of course, understanding the port and starboard lights is a very good way of working out which direction boats are going. And of course, if you see both port and starboard light, it means you are heading for a collision because it's coming straight at you. I would say probably the most important boats to understand in terms of their lights are tugs and fishing boats. Those are perhaps two of the most common vessels that we see in this area, and they can look quite similar. Of course, tugs have the array of 3 lights, one on top of the other, so that's a bit of a giveaway. Sometimes they don't light up their tow, so you just need to know that it's a tug by recognising those lights. But quite often from a distance, that big array of lights can look just like fishing boats, and that's something else we see a lot of. So with fishing boats, what we tend to find is that if they're really, really lit up, really bright, with white lights all over the boat, or perhaps if they have lots of green lights, more than likely these boats are stationary. So sometimes at night time we come up on watch and you see lots and lots of white lights all over the horizon. It looks quite intimidating, but in fact quite often these guys are actually fishing and dropping nets using those lights, so they tend to be stationary, which can be to your advantage. Don't assume that all boats are stationary though. They quite often will move around, not displaying the correct navigation lights.
On this trip, of course, we are going through a part of Indonesia that is littered with islands, so we've got hazards all around us, front, sides and back. There are potential hazards just lurking there, rocks just under the water, we've got reefs, we've got islands, we've got shoals, we've got all kinds of things, so we have to really be on our toes. And obviously we have to do that in the day as well, but at night you don't have that vision through your eyes that much for anything like that. You're relying very much on your charts, chart plotter, radar and your wits to make sure that you make the right passage and you avoid those kinds of hazards. So assuming you've got all of the chart information in front of you and you've done your homework, you know roughly what you're doing over the next 2 hours, the rest of the time I like to be in the cockpit looking. I'm looking 360 all the time, front and back, sides, and I'm looking for lights. So that's the next thing. You have to know what those lights mean. And if you do any kind of courses in sailing, you learn what all those different light configurations mean, and it's great if you're in Europe or America or somewhere like that, because everything you see in front of you is clearly lit and abides by the coal regs. Come a bit further away from there to somewhere like Southeast Asia, where there are fishing fleet after fishing fleet out always at night. They have their own idea of how to light a boat.
Another thing that's worth bearing in mind, and I think we've mentioned this before, is night watches. It's really important to stick to a schedule. For Liz and myself, we feel that 2 hours on, 2 hours off works well for us. When we first started, what I was doing was I was letting Liz go to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening, and I would let her sleep right the way through until gone midnight, just so that she got a good night's sleep. Of course, the problem with that is that if an emergency happens after she's on watch and after she's gone to bed and I'm knackered, I'm going to be pretty tired to handle that emergency situation. So this is why it's important to stick to your 2 hour watches. We tend to start at 6 in the evening, so quite often your first couple of watches you may not even be tired, but it's just good to rest that body, just get over those aches and pains, which leads me on to the next point, which is multiple nights versus single night crossings. It takes the body a while to adjust to night watches and to do your night schedules for your night watches. So what I find is that the first night is really difficult, and next morning I wake up aching, and very tired. And then when the sun comes up, I find that my body sort of wakes up, and then it starts to get used to the routine. And so the second night is almost invariably always so much more comfortable than the first night. So just bear that in mind. If you've got a long passage and you absolutely find the first night hell, don't worry, it gets easier.
So this is what I mean about having your wits about you when you're on night watch. And because of that, it is very tiring, because your adrenaline is slightly on the go the whole 2 hours. I'm up and downstairs checking on the instruments down below, checking on the instruments up top. And so it's actually physically quite tiring, and we find that 2 hours is really probably enough for us for night watches, certainly in this area. In the oceans we can do 3 hours quite easily.
What you might find as you adjust to your watch schedule, that you start to get very tired, and I know Liz and I in the past have got extremely tired and have started hallucinating. So a few little ideas to keep yourself occupied. You could put in regular log entries. That focuses the mind and encourages you to check your position and to pick up a pen and to use your brain a little to fill in your longitude and latitude, your speed and the wind direction and so on. Another thing, of course, is that you should be keeping a regular watch out. So quite often we tend to stay in the cockpit, but we'll switch sides in the cockpit, we'll stand behind the helm, stand up above in front of the mizzen. Just keep a keen eye out, always looking around at least every 10 minutes or so. Liz and I also listen to podcasts. I think podcasts is probably a very good compromise when it comes to entertainment while you are doing your night watches. But I would recommend only using earbuds rather than over-the-ear noise-cancelling headphones. You don't want to be using anything like that because, of course, you want to be hearing what's going on around you. Maybe only use one ear as well. But at least with podcasts, you've just got the audio distraction. There's no video distraction. So I really would not recommend playing on your phone or watching movies or TV shows on the phone, because they are a real distraction.
I never listen to music in those circumstances, or very seldom do actually when we're sailing. I just like to listen to the sound of the sea, and it's amazing what you can hear. And even at night, sometimes you hear birds. You certainly hear dolphins and other mammals that are swimming around the boat. You can hear them breathing. You can see them in the phosphorescence. There is something very magical and mystical about night sailing in an ocean.
Make cups of tea, make cups of coffee, that's another one. Especially if you're switching over, perhaps you may have an arrangement with the person taking over from you that you stick the kettle on so that they can make themselves a cup of tea when they come to take over. That brings me on to another point, which is power.
We have an autopilot, and she's been working fantastically well. So we're now autopiloting everywhere. We're not hand steering very much, and that's fine. The only thing is, what you have to look out for at night is draining the batteries.
One of the issues that we've found in these recent crossings we've been doing at night is that our batteries are now 5 years old, and so they're losing a little bit of their capacity. And of course, we are running the autopilot all the time, every night, all night. And what we're finding is that by the time the sun rises in the morning, our batteries are very low. And that's something that we've had to keep an eye on. Now, this is especially the case because, of course, we are running with the wind. So we are essentially slaloming down the waves, and so the autopilot is working extra hard. But just bear in mind that if you're going to have your autopilot on all night, you do have the battery capacity to see you through the night, and maybe enough to start the engine in an emergency or to keep all your instruments ticking over. It's just something worth bearing in mind, because it's something that we've had to keep our eye on these last couple of months or so.
So just be very mindful of how much battery power is being used by the autopilot, by the light, navigation lights, and anything else you've got plugged in, maybe the fridge is going. And we have found that sometimes it can get a bit tricky getting through the night with enough power. We do it, it's fine, but you do have to be mindful of it. Once or twice Jamie has used our generator, our portable generator, just to boost the batteries before it's night, and that helps a lot.
Always make sure your crew are well fed, yourself included. So best thing to do is to prepare food before you leave. and try and use menus that don't require too much cooking or heating up. So obviously do your cooking before you leave, but if it's then something that you can just dip into from the fridge, it just saves the hassle of having to heat things up at night. I'm just saying this in particular with these kind of conditions where it's very rolly and it can be quite uncomfortable in the galley.
Before the night begins, I usually try to have a pot of tea all ready to go in a thermos. We have salads and bits you can pick at. Maybe we've had a nice big lunch or a late lunch in the day, so our bellies are full. Because one of the things you do tend to do a lot of is drinking throughout the night. Water, juices, teas, not really coffee unless you desperately do need to be staying awake. We also have things to pick at, like lots of biscuits, cheese and biscuits, little salady things. You can just do a little bowl of salad quite quickly. And when you're on watch, you don't have to be in the cockpit the entire time. You can go down below for a few minutes now and again to prepare yourself a cup of tea, to put some food together. Just go up and down because you're keeping careful watch all the time, so you know what's going on in the horizons.
So if you're doing, just a couple of nights and a couple of days, then it's perfectly feasible to prepare your food before you leave.
We have a general rule not to go outside the cockpit, and if the other one is up there for obvious reasons. You don't want to be falling in while the other one's asleep down below for the next hour. No one will ever find you. And if you do go out of the cockpit, you need to be tethered. You need to be tethered to the boat in some way, so if there was a sudden lurch and you were to go over the edge, you'd still be tethered to the boat and the other one can help.
One of the first things you learn about night sailing is to reef down for the evening. This is a very sensible tip because quite often at night time, if the weather changes, you can't really see what you're doing. And what you want to avoid is to be running around on deck in the dark, tripping over lines and what have you. So always best to be a bit prudent. You may lose a knot or so of speed, but it's worth just maybe reefing in a couple of those sails, just in case the inevitable happens.
Recently, we had such bad weather in the middle of the night that the autopilot could not deal with the waves. It was incredibly rough. Mad storm. We'll talk about that in a blog very soon. But that meant that Jamie had to hand steer. And actually, hand steering I like hand steering. It's good. You don't want to do it for days on end, but a little bit of hand steering now and again just gets you in tune with the boat. So if in doubt, hand steer. And at night, it's not difficult. You just follow what you're seeing in front of you. You have a course to steer. You stick to that course.
Well, I thought I'd give you a real-world example of what we're doing on our night watches, and for those watching, all you're going to see is a black screen, but this is a audio podcast first and video second, so bear with me. But essentially what I did was I stood behind the helm on the seat, so I have a slight elevation, and that allows me to see a little bit further than where I'd to be sitting in the cockpit. So I can just see boats coming over the horizon, and I've just spotted the first set of lights.
One of the worst things to encounter at night is a tug. One of the good things about tugs is they're very easy to identify because of their lights. They have 3 white lights like that. And you can very easily see that they're coming at you with their 3 white lights. But what you can't usually and quite often can't see is the load that's with them. So you don't know where the load is. It's not always going to be right behind them. It's sometimes right next to them because of the currents, the weather, the tides. The loads can be anywhere, and they can be different sizes.
So the first thing I'll do is grab the bins and to see what kind of lighting configuration I can see. Can I see a port or starboard light? Are there an array of lights to suggest it's a tug or a fishing boat? And then after that, I will then grab the hand-bearing compass.
Use your hand-bearing compass at night to give you a true bearing, and you keep taking that bearing every 5 minutes to see where it's moving, and then that gives you an idea of its trajectory on your mental map and on your chart. The
other thing you want to do when you're using your hand-bearing compass is to make sure you're not holding anything that's magnetic or non-stainless. Maybe you've got a torch in your hand, that will affect the compass. So make sure that you use the compass free of any instruments that's going to affect your reading.
If you don't have a hand-bearing compass, you've got to get one. They're absolutely incredibly useful. If you haven't got one though, use a transit. On Esper we have more rigging than we have boats, so we've got so many lines we can take transits from. But when you take a transit, you do need to make sure that you always sit in the same place so that you can see whether the boat or whether the light has moved one way or the other. And then that also gives you an idea of the movement of the boat. This is something you can do in the daytime as well. If you don't, if you, for some reason or other, you can't get hold of the AIS signal, or the radar's not clear, use transits from the cockpit and always do it in the same place. Now typically, as I'm talking, over here we've got this tug, large tow. Jamie's had to move the boat because we're not going to take any chances. He does appear to be coming towards us, but we're just going to go slightly. I think he's just moved the boat 10 degrees to starboard.
Then I nip down below and check the AIS targets to see if it's appeared on our chart plotter.
The other thing with tugs in this area is they never put their AIS on, so it's difficult to work out which way they are going.
Now normally we have our chart plotter synced to our phone, so on Navionics on our phone we have the AIS targets, but for some reason it stopped working this afternoon, so I have to nip down below. Anyway, it keeps me on my toes. Come back up and repeat the whole process. So that is literally the only light I can see at the moment, and he's just a little bit too far away to discern any particular lights. So I'll keep an eye on that.
An important part of night sailing is to get your night vision. You don't want to be turning on lights. You need to have really good vision, because sometimes, as I said earlier, there are little boats in this part of the world that don't put lights on. And if you've got a good night vision, you can generally see shapes in the sea. Certainly if you've got a moon like we had here, you can see really well, and you can see these little shapes very clearly. Then you get the bins out, have a good look. They won't be on the radar, they won't be anywhere, but you need to be keeping a good lookout for those.
Okay, little update. I think it's a tug. I think that's what it is. I can see his three lights, and it looks as if his tow is lit. What was worrying me was that the bearing wasn't changing quickly enough, but it has now gone up from 330 to 340. It took a while for that to change, but that kind of makes sense. I suspect that he's probably coming down from Singapore and maybe heading due south. We're heading northwest, so the angle is quite acute, so that bearing is not going to change quickly. But the fact that I can see only his starboard light suggests that we are going to pass starboard to starboard. But anyway, that's just a little example of the sort of things that we have to do. And unfortunately, he's all lit up correctly from what I can see, if I am correct. However, he is not on AIS. And we find a lot of the tugs here and most of the fishing boats are not on AIS. Sometimes tugs have Class A transponders and some have Class B transponders. When they have Class B transponders like us, it means that it takes a while for the AIS target to appear. But don't assume that every boat, every commercial vessel has AIS, because they don't.
We have something called FADs here, which are fish attraction or fish aggregation devices. These are just floating piles of crap, bits of old wood, maybe a palm leaf or two. They just float around the waters of Indonesia. Absolute bastards, really. They're not good. Although recently there has been a move in Indonesia to put lights on them, which is fantastic. So they're lit up at night. So at least you know there's a light. You might not know what it is, but you know there's a light there, so there's something to think about. And the other thing they have here is fishing platforms. Now these are routed to the spot. The Java Sea, it's very shallow. So it's very easy to see these all across the Java Sea. They're not deep, so they're very easy to route. They are enormous, with great big nets on them that they fish with throughout the night. They just drop the nets. When they drop the nets, they often turn the lights out. So you've gone from an incredible blaring white, glaring array of lights to total darkness. Tells you that they're fishing. But if you've been doing your watch properly, you know that that is a light that's not moving. It hasn't moved towards you or away from you, so it's static. So they're good, we like those. And the same thing for chumi, squid fishing boats. In Thailand, they light them up all green at night. And when you see a green lights at night, I mean really bright green lights, you're thankful because you know that they're not going anywhere. They're in the act of fishing, and that involves being at anchor while they fish.
The other reason, of course, for my bearing to take a very long time to change is that he's probably only doing 1 knot. If you think that we've been running with the sea and we've been getting, I don't know, 1.5 metres up to 2 metres sea, we've seen fishing boats and tugs thrashing their way through the sea going in the other direction, and they make very slow progress. Earlier today I watched the tug. Now he had a Class A transponder, so I was able to see that the tug was heading to Jakarta, and it was towing, well, what I can only describe, looked like a paddle steamer. It was some kind of huge ship, but obviously been decommissioned or has got a problem. Anyway, the tug was towing this, and he was doing anything between 1/2 knot and 1.5 knots. Since his destination was Jakarta, I worked out that's going to take him about 13 days to get there. The other thing you'll notice as well is that when AIS targets are that slow, they can be quite erratic as well, so their direction can change. And in fact, that tug that I was watching earlier, he had his AIS on, and so did his tow. And so I was able to compare the 2 AIS targets, and they kept chopping and changing. 1/2 knot going in this direction, 1.5 knots going in that direction. That can add to the confusion. So it's worth bearing in mind, especially with slow moving vessels like tugs, that as we've just seen, if the bearing doesn't appear to be changing, it is quite possible he's either stationary or moving very slowly.
On Esper, if I'm on watch and I'm not sure about what's going on, I will wake Jamie up. I always feel guilty about it because he needs his sleep, but if I'm not sure, it's much better to have the skipper there, have 2 eyes, and make a decision together about what's happening. And he'll wake me up as well if he's getting confused about what he's seeing. It really helps when the 2 of you look at it together and come up with a plan. Now, on this particular night, I had to wake him up on both watches. The first watch, we had a lot of lights. He went to bed with no lights on the horizon, none at all. I then start my watch, cock up my recording and get ready to record again and see 3 or 4 lights. One of them didn't make any sense at all, and one of them was coming from behind on AIS, straight at us, but he was a way away. So first of all I looked at the white light on the horizon, so it's on my port side, it was on the horizon, it didn't appear to be moving. It's quite a tricky one to work out. It wasn't on AIS. Eventually, as it came towards us, and as the one behind that was on AIS, which was not altering its course and really coming straight for us, it's a big boat, I thought I've got to get Jamie up. So got Jamie up, by which time the bright light at the front was clearly a fishing boat and was going to go down our port side. So that was fine, it was quite close, but it was fine. But the one behind us was coming closer and closer, and there's no way, we were sailing, there's no way we were going to be able to get out of his way. So Jamie had to get on the VHF and talk to him, got him on the radio, and yes, sir, I see you, yes, I see you on AIS, blah, blah, blah. Jamie requested for him to go behind. And he said he was going to go past the fishing vessel and then round us, and it made no sense. For 10 minutes, I should think, there was a conversation back and forth, and it became very clear that this man was looking at our AIS signal, and he was looking at a different boat in front of him, and he was using the boat in front of him to make his decisions. Jamie did nearly lose his rag, but he was very patient and kept talking to the bloke. We eventually turned all the lights on deck and shone a torch at the sail so that he could see us. There was a moment's silence, and he suddenly altered his course. I think that my heart was in my mouth at that stage. I was sure he was going to hit us, but anyway, that'll be properly on our blog in the next couple of weeks. Of course, the watchword always is, if in doubt, steer clear, without going into another hazard. It is stressful. Night sailing is stressful. There is no 2 ways about it. For me, night sailing, my friend, is always the moon, because I can then see a whole lot more of what's going on, and you can start to enjoy it again.